Hello, my name is Robert Bubb, and I am a Statistics and Research Methods lecturer in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at Auburn University. And today I'd like to talk to you about the often misunderstood purpose of science. So to get at the purpose of science, we have to talk about the philosophy of science. And there's no better person to discuss than Karl Popper. So here's a picture of Karl Popper up here on the slide. Now, you've probably never heard of Karl Popper. Pretty much all my students that I ask have not. Usually when I introduce them, it's the first time they've ever heard of him. In fact, I can't remember a time in a class where a student actually knew who he was. So then, who was Karl Popper? Well, thank you for asking from your computers at home and your mobile devices. Karl was a scientist, but not just a scientist, he was also a philosopher. In fact, he's considered one of the greatest philosophers of science in the 20th century. In 1934, he wrote the book, The Logic of Scientific Discovery. I actually have a copy of it. It was being given away at a library, which I was really excited to get a hold of because I had heard about him in a class when I was an undergraduate. And in this book, he outlines the purpose of science in a very, very clever way, and I'd like to share that with you here today. So at the time of his book, in the early 20th century, the understanding of science was to confirm hypotheses through observation. In essence, to prove theories. And science was all about proof at that time. So with this in mind, Karl would approach his students with a simple problem. He would say, I have observed white sheep. So there's some white sheep up there on the slide. And so he would say to his students, scientifically prove to me that all sheep are white. After all, proof was the thinking of the day. So I'd like to approach you with this same problem. I would like you to think about what would it take to prove that all sheep are white. I'll give you a moment to think about it. What would it take to prove that all sheep are white? And it probably doesn't take you very long to come up with that particular that thought of how we could prove this. But the general response that he would get is, well, you would need to see every single sheep. Right? And if you saw every single sheep and they were all white, then you could prove this statement that all sheep are white. And that would be correct, but not only every sheep currently in existence, because the statement says all sheep, but that would mean also every sheep that currently exists, that ever has existed, and that ever will exist. For us to prove this statement that all sheep are white. Now, is that possible? Quite clearly, it is not possible, right? We can't go back in time. We can't see every sheep now, and we can't transverse the future to see if the sheep in the future are white either. So it's not possible, right? It's not possible. And because it's not possible, Karl concluded that the purpose of science can't be to confirm or prove, because we will always miss observing some sheep. We'll always miss observing some phenomenon of interest. And maybe the one sheep we don't observe will be the one that is not white. So therefore, that can't be the goal of science. The goal of science can't be to prove. In essence, Karl Popper said it is impossible to prove with science. That is not the business of science. We can't prove. Karl would then ask his students, if we can't prove that all sheep are white, what would it then take to disprove that all sheep are white? So we can't prove it. Maybe we can disprove that all sheep are white. So again, I'll give you a minute to think about it. What would it take to disprove that all sheep are white? Just take a moment. It won't take you very long, right, to think of how we can disprove this statement. Would it take just one sheep that's not white, right? Just one. If we can find one, then we can disprove that statement that all sheep are white. So maybe it would be a black sheep. That's right. If you don't get it, neither do all my students either. If you haven't seen the movie Black Sheep, right, then this won't, you won't quite get it. Okay, so go see the movie Black Sheep. That's what I'm saying. So, all right, so maybe it's a black sheep, right? We see a black sheep. So here's a real black sheep, not from a movie, but here's a real black sheep. So if I can find one sheep that's not white, maybe it's a black sheep, right? Then I can disprove that statement. All right, so it's impossible to prove that all sheep are white, but it's very possible to disprove all sheep are white. I just need one that's not white, and I can disprove it. So once I observe a sheep that is not white, I have falsified or disproven the original hypothesis. That original hypothesis being that all sheep are white. I have disproved it. I have falsified it. This led Carl to conclude that the purpose of science is not to prove, because proof is impossible, but rather the purpose of science is to disprove. It's to falsify, it's to disprove. So he would term this empirical falsification, the idea that knowledge can only be obtained through disproof or falsification. And it is through this disproof that we now know that sheep are not just white, but they can also be black. And now we've learned something. We've obtained some knowledge. Right? So in this process, we generate a new hypothesis to disprove. Right? So we now alter our hypothesis with this new knowledge that all sheep are white or black. That's our new hypothesis, because we've observed now white and black sheep. So we would assume that this new hypothesis is correct until I came across a brown sheep to disprove it, or maybe a gray sheep, or tan sheep, or polka dotted sheep, or plaid sheep, whatever it may be, right? Just any sheep that's not white or black, right? So science becomes an iterative process, a continual process or cycle of disproof or falsification. And you will note this cycle in your textbook. If you look on under the heading of research methods, you'll see a diagram in there that shows this cycle of disproof of how we obtain knowledge. All right, so you'll note this cycle in your textbook under the research methods heading in your chapter. Now, so we start with an observation that spurs a question. Okay? We then turn that question into a hypothesis, a predictive statement called a null hypothesis. We will assume that this null hypothesis is correct until there is enough evidence to reject it or falsify it. That evidence to reject comes from some research method or some observation. And then once our original hypothesis is disproven or rejected, we then adjust our knowledge structure that leads to a new research question and a new hypothesis to disprove or reject. This is the cyclical process of science. This is the purpose of science, to continually disprove, not to prove. So the next time you see an advertisement that looks something like this, right, you can rest assured it was not proven by science. Scientifically proven can't be possible, right? It's not possible. That can't be what we do with science. And so we should be leery about advertisements that tell us it's been scientifically proven, because we don't prove with science. In fact, in this case, it's been proved by marketing, right, to make money, right? So it is not the purpose of science to prove. So in conclusion, we're talking about the purpose of science. And so science is not in the business of proving anything. Rather, science is in the business of disproving everything. And it is through this disproof that we can come to know something. So I want to thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your course.